Almighty and everlasting God, give to us the increase of grace, faith, and hope, and charity, and that we may obtain what you promised to us. Make us to love the things that you earnestly love, that we may, body and soul and mind, follow you hard, faithfully, into your good pleasure, through the might of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Verse 2 of hymn 107. Good Christian friends, rejoice with heart and voice. Now ye hear of endless bliss. Jesus Christ was born for this. He hath opened heaven's doors, and we are blessed forevermore. Christ was born for this. Christ was born for this. Well, you sing that kind of thing. Richard Baxter and Kidderminster might get a little unhappy. There's too much rejoicing in that. Well, we're with Bishop Browne's St. Aldhelm, or Aldhelm, his life and times. Bishop Browne was the Bishop of Bristol, formerly Disney Professor of Art and Archaeology, University of Cambridge. Society for Promotion of Christian Knowledge, 1903. Institute of Medieval Studies, wherever that's at. The contents, Chapter 1, Connection of the See of Bristol, St. Aldhelm. Composite character of the see, consequent powers of the bishop. Erection of Bristol into a city, period covered by the lectures. Ecclesiastical condition of England and Aldhelm's early time. Sources of information, William of Malmesbury, Feridius, William's account of the Vale of Gloucester, and of Bristol, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Chapter 2, Malmesbury, its position in early history, Leland's account. The West Saxon conquest, suggested antecedents of Maildub, Augustine's visit to the neighborhood, Aldhelm's contemporaries, connection with Ireland, English art, literature, architecture in Aldhelm's time, suggested origin of Anglian art. Chapter 3, William of Malmesbury's scheme for his work, Aldhelm's race, spelling and meaning of his name, parentage, education, origin of the name Malmesbury, the Benedictine rule, Aldhelm's study at Canterbury, learning, skill in versification, recognized as a master of style, the Irish art will in Colanus, his personal influence with friends and pupils, letter to the clergy of Wilfrith and to Ethelwald, a student. Chapter 4, the desire to visit the tombs of St. Peter and St. Paul, the Scala Saxonum in Rome. That's interesting. And the English college there, that too is interesting. The origin of the ecclesiastical regard for Rome, Aldhelm's style, his knowledge, the monasteries which he built, great gifts to Aldhelm's monastery, churches which he built. Chapter 5, Aldhelm's manner of life, his visit to Rome. And I can understand that. Delay at Warham. And you can bet you bought him dollars down there copying books too. The church which he built, the site of the church, miracles at Rome, the chasuble, the speaking infant, the marble altar, treasures of art lost by Wessex. Chapter 6, Aldhelm's election and consecration as bishop, his miracles of the book, his concessions to his monasteries, his hard work in his diocese, his death and burial, the crosses erected at the places where his body rested, some account of Saxon sculptured stones still remaining in those parts. 7, the Abbey of Malmesbury, 250 years after Aldhelm, relics of the saint, the silver gilt shrine, the miracle shown on the panels of the shrine, other gold and silver work in Wessex, organs, bells, and other gifts from Dunstan, the Danes in the shrine, later history of the shrine, Shrine, the abbots to William's time, some lesser miracles. Chapter 8, Athelstan and Malmesbury, rearrangement of the diocese of Wessex from Aldhelm's time to the present. The Abbey Church as it now stands, Chapter 9. 3 of Aldhelm's sacred hymns on the basilica built by Bug, the daughter of the King of England. On the altars dedicated to the Blessed Mary and 12 Apostles on entering the Church of St. Peter and St. Paul. Chapter 10, Letter from an Irishman and to Ephred, John the Scot, Eldfrith, Concourse of English Students to Ireland. Connection between England and Ireland. Origin of the English coronation service. 11, the letter to Akirkius, the Enigmas in Praise of Virgins, letter to Osgoth. 12, letter to the Britons. Appendix. Extracts from the charter of the bishopric of Bristol as granted by Henry VIII. The Pope's ratification of the bishopric. Notes on wine growing in England. King Athelstan's gift. King Athelstan's feast day index. Illustrations. Abbey Church, Malmesbury in 1903. Saxon Church at Bradford on Avon. Saxon Wall at Corfe Castle. Sculptured stone at a whole bunch of places. Altar of Wolvinius Stoll of Frithson Cross, Abbey Church of Malmesbury, 1900. St. Aldhelm, Chapter 1, Connection of the See of Bristol with St. Aldhelm, Composite Character of the See, Consequent Powers of the Bishop, Erection of Bristol into a City, period covered by the lectures, Ecclesiastical Condition of England in Aldhelm's time, Sources of information, William of Malmesbury, Faridius and Handbach, William's account of the Vale of Gloucester and of Bristol, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. During the 5 years of my residence at St. Paul's, we had in each year 2 courses of lectures on English church history, 1 course in some medieval period, and 1 on the earliest periods of the church in these islands. The lectures on medieval periods were delivered by Dr. Creighton, Dr. Arthur Mason, and others. The 5 courses on our earliest church history fell to my lot. They covered the history of the Christian church in these islands before the coming of St. Augustine, that is, of the history of the British and Scotic churches, Scotic meaning Irish, whether in Ireland, Scotland, or Britain. 2, the history of St. Augustine and his own companions. 3, the conversion of the Heptarchy. 4, some general lessons from our early church history. And 5, the lives of Theodore Canterbury and Wilfrid of York. These 5 courses have since published in small volumes by the Society for the Promoting of Christian Knowledge, 2 of them with illustrations of some monuments of those ancient times. In all those lectures, the lecturer spoke as a Northumbrian. He took Northumbria to be at once the most important and most interesting of all the kingdoms of the Heptarchy. Its history, most fascinating and most instructive. Its rulers, the most national and most independent. Its first ecclesiastical traveler and first ecclesiastical historian, Bishop, Biscop, and Bede, beyond compare with any corresponding personages of any of the other kingdoms. And these course of lectures had not been interrupted. The lecturer had proposed to turn his attention to the quarter opposite to the northeast of England, that is, to the southwest. Here 2 names stood out. The one was that of the native Englishman, who was said to have been the first Englishman to teach Latin in England, and who says of himself that he was the first Englishman to study the meters of Latin poetry. I mean, of course, Aldhelm, Abbot of Malmesbury and Bishop of Sherborne. The other was that of the great Englishman who went from Crediton while it was still a British place and Christianized practically all of Germany, meeting at least the fate to which no missionary to the Angles and Saxons or Jutes of this island ever was subjected, so far as we know. I mean the arch-martyr Archbishop of Mentz, the Devonshire Winfrid, the martyr Boniface. A course of lectures would be well woven around the story of each of these two marked men. Then a return to the history of Northumbria would have produced a course of lectures on the history of man in some ways more marked than any of the others, the learned Alcuin, who was a boy pupil at my school, the Cathedral School of York, under the brother of the reigning king, who was then its headmaster, an office to which Alcuin himself succeeded after it had been held for a time by another relative of the king. Beyond that period, say from 750 to 800, I should not have cared to go. A period of terrible gloom had set in. As in our earliest times, the Church of England was bright and prosperous beyond the experience of any other nation. So in the times which followed, disasters scarce paralleled anywhere came upon us. It is a question whether even the Saxons in lands further south wrought dramatically proportionally a deeper agony than the Danes wrought here. It is to me an instructive coincidence that while Aldhelm was to have been my next subject at St. Paul's, I find myself now in charge of those parts in Wiltshire in which by far the largest part of his life was spent. The Bishop of Bristol has charge of the actual place in which Aldhelm studied as a boy, taught as a man, ruled as an abbot, and lived through the whole of his long life except for 4 or 5 years, where now the great Norman Abbey Church of Malmesbury still stands. The charge is delightful in itself and its associations, as it is anxious by reason of the state of the fabric. It is a further coincidence that until the year 1836, the See of Bristol, though up to that date it did not include Malmesbury, it did include, and had for 300 years included, the whole county of Dorset, with Aldhelm's own abbey of Sherborne, eventually his bishop's seat and title, his home for the last 4 years of his life. While Aldhelm thus spent the whole of his life in the kingdom of Wessex, excepting a sojourn at Canterbury and a visit to Rome, and Wessex therefore is the geographical area of our subject, we cannot altogether neglect Mercia. The boundaries of the two kingdoms were not very certain at any time, and they appear to have varied not inconsiderably. The usual boundary line passed very near Malmesbury. The present-day Gloucestershire comes within 3 miles of that Wiltshire town on the Shipton-Moyne Road. We shall see at a later stage how the danger of this proximity to another kingdom, often actively hostile, was guarded against by agreement between the two nations on the wise suggestion of Aldhelm. It may be added that old Malmesbury was always, so far as we know, in Wessex after its late conquest from the Britons by the West Saxons. Yet the earliest recorded grants to Aldhelm's monastery are grants not from kings of Wessex, but from kings and princes of Mercia. As telling in the opposite direction, it may be further added that the castle of Beaverstone, Gloucestershire, near Malmesbury, appears to have been a residence of Godwin as Earl of Wessex. We shall see later on how directly Godwin and Harold intervened in the affairs of Malmesbury in their time. The variation of boundary line between Wessex and Mercia has been renewed in the present generation by the city councils. Okay, blah, blah, blah about boundaries. I'm going to skip a little here. Composite character of the See of Bristol is carried even further than this. It includes 90,000 persons on the Somersetshire side of the Avon. Moreover, Bristol is itself a county. Thus, the See is made up of the county of the city of Bristol, portions of the counties of Gloucester, Somerset, and Wilts. It will readily be understood that a bishop of a newly revived see, who has no lord lieutenant in conjunction with whom he can call a county meeting, and has portions of 3 counties and 2 kingdoms under his charge, some of those portions still actively conscious of recent changes, has difficulty in fostering a diocesan feeling. The composite character of the See of Bristol has one important result of a far-reaching character. When Henry VIII was creating the See, creation especially continued in Queen Mary's time by the Pope in an ex post facto document. Mary and the consecrators of Holywell not having waited for any papal ratification, the king gave by charter to the bishops of Bristol all the powers possessed by the bishops of the diocese from which the several portions were taken. There's an idea in some quarters that the bishops of the new foundations have less power in their cathedral churches than bishops of old foundations have, and there appears to be the idea that bishops of Henry VIII's foundations have less power than any. The opposite of this is the actual fact, so far as Bristol is concerned. By the Charter of 1542, the cathedral church consists of the bishop, dean, and 6, now 4, prebendaries. It is declared to be the cathedral church and episcopal seat of the bishop. The bishop has all jurisdiction, power, and authority, ordinarial and episcopal, within the cathedral church and the diocese, as amply as the bishops of Sarum, Bath, Wells, Worcester, Gloucester, the 4 sees, from which portions were taken, and as any English bishop can have. I don't know how this has to do with Aldhelm. More about himself. His Bristol. Statutes of the cathedral. He's talking about the bishop's powers. We'd like to get to the subject at hand and all his problems with sheriffs, town of Bristol. They have a sheriff, blah, blah, blah. Too much talking here. As to the period which these lectures will cover, it is sufficient here to say that Aldhelm died in the year 709. And what Bede is born in 675. Who was the other guy? 635. Drawing a blank. Aidan. Died in 709, and he is described by William of Malmesbury as at least a septuagenarian. We may safely place his birth as early as 639, with kind of a contemporary of Aidan up north. And as much as the king of Wessex, to whom Aldhelm was related, had been a pagan until his baptism in 634, when Christianity was for the first time preached to the West Saxon. It is certain that Aldhelm's parents were pagans, at least down to a very few years before his birth. As regards the other 2 kingdoms with which we are to be concerned, Aldhelm was at least 12 years old when the teaching of Christianity was first admitted into the kingdom of Mercia, and at least 16 when the first Christian king began to reign there. In the first 12 or 16 years of Aldhelm's life, Malmesbury was still in the hands of the old inhabitants, being the northern fortress of the great kingdom of the Damnonian Britons. The forest of Selwood, which ran up to Cricklade formed so long a time an impenetrable barrier to the advance westward of the West Saxons, was not pierced by them till they won the battles of Bradford and Penn in 652. 658. It was only then that Malmesbury, a stronghold alike of British Christianity and British sovereignty, fell into the hands of the Saxons, who unfortunately had by that time become Christians and did not break the continuity of Christian worship there. We shall not break off abruptly with the year of Aldhelm's death. Malmesbury is a sacred charge to the diocese, and we must see something more of its history than such a limit would allow. It is necessary for us to sketch concisely the ecclesiastical condition of England at the time when Aldhelm came to maturity. When Archbishop Theodore reached England at the end of May in the year 669, that's the guy from Tarsus, Cilicia, bringing Greek with him, at which time Aldhelm was nearly 30 years old, he found that the Italian mission of 70 years before had left but small results and almost no machinery. He had almost a tabula rasa to work upon, and that no doubt was the main element in his success. Before his arrival, that is between 597 and 669, 28 bishops and archbishops had been consecrated to sees in the territories occupied by the several sections of the English race. Of these 28, only 12 had been consecrated by bishops connected with the Roman mission, namely 3 to Canterbury, of whom 1 was consecrated to that see before it was vacant. Therefore, it was a very doubtful position. Another was consecrated by a bishop without a pall, 4 to Rochester, 1 to London, which is East Saxon, not Mercian at the time, 3 to Dunwich, 1 to York. Not one of these, you will see, was consecrated to any part of the territory included in the Diocese of Bristol. No Mercian bishop and no West Saxon bishop derived consecration from Augustine. 9 of the remaining 16 consecrations of the 28 before Theodore's arrival were these: 2 of the Canterbury, namely Augustine by a Gallican prelate, Virgilius of Arles, and Theodore by Pope Vitalian; 2 to York by French and British bishops; 4 to Lindisfarne, 3 by Finian, and 1 by Irish bishops; 1 to London by Finan. Last, we have 7 consecrations to which we are territorially interested: 2 to Dorchester, the Dorchester near Oxford, the original seat of the Wessex bishopric; 1 of the 2 by Asterius of Milan, and the other by French bishops; 1 to Winchester, which had then become the seat of the Wessex bishopric, by French bishops; 4 to Mercia, 3 by Finan, and 1 by Irish bishops. Not one of these had any connection with the Italian mission. That is a sufficiently striking criticism of the success of the Italian mission of Augustine. It is more remarkable still that in 669, 72 years after the arrival of Augustine, Theodore found in all his English territories only 3 bishops with sees: East Saxon, East Anglian, and Northumbrian. Of these, the only one who had the Canterbury consecration was dying, Boniface of East Anglia. The East Saxon bishop was a French consecration, and the Northumbrian a French and British. There was no bishop of Mercia, no bishop of Wessex. Almost dead is the verdict, which the facts right across the page, of which the history and results, the Italian mission, are recorded. It's interesting, he calls it the Italian mission. 19th century, 20th century historian, 19th century. Aldhelm was an important factor in the new and larger life of this church. A summary of a different character will help us to set Aldhelm with some accuracy among his historical surroundings and will enable us better to appreciate the earliness of the period in which our thoughts are to dwell. The first Christian king of Wessex, Cinegils, was taught, catechized, and baptized by Browne about 634, some 5 years before Aldhelm's birth. Berenius' see was placed at Dorchester near the modern Oxford, and his church was dedicated to St. Peter and St. Paul. On the death of Cinegils about 642-43, his son Ken Walsh restored paganism when Aldhelm was but a little child of 4. The pagan Penda of Mercia expelled him. He was converted by the king of East Anglia and restored. He built a church at Winchester about 648, dedicated to St. Peter and St. Paul. Browne died in 650 when Aldhelm was 11 years old. A prelate from Ireland succeeded Agilbert. He left in 663, and for 8 years or so, while Aldhelm grew up to 24 to 32 years of age, there was no bishop in Wessex. Then Agilbert's nephew, Leutherius, was sent over and became bishop. His seat was still at Dorchester, and he ruled there from 671 to 676. It was he who raised Malmesbury to the dignity of an abbey and made Aldhelm the first abbot. It is necessary to say something here on the sources of our information about Aldhelm himself and his immediate concerns. From a description of St. Aldhelm's shrine as completed by King Ethelwulf, the father of Alfred, William of Malmesbury argued in 1125 that there must have been at Malmesbury in Ethelwulf's time a record of the chief events of Aldhelm's life, which had perished in the ravages by the Danes. Of materials for his life existing in William's own time, William remarks that the account of him given by Bede about 730 is very meager, while the life written by Ferretius is not trustworthy. One of these criticisms, that on Bede, who was about 40 years younger than Aldhelm, is just. As regards Ferretius, William was not an unbiased critic. We shall see shortly what it is that Bede tells us. Ferretius wrote only a few years before William of Malmesbury. We have his life of Aldhelm. Ferretius was originally a physician of Lombard extraction at Arentino in Tuscany. He came to England about the year 1100, became a monk of Malmesbury, and thence went to Abingdon as abbot, where he greatly proved the position of that most important monastery. William of Malmesbury, who is always human and always tries to be fair, thinks it may be as well that, though he criticizes Ferretius, he should record in his pages some Latin verses in praise of the work which he accomplished at Abingdon, written by William's fellow monk Peter. If anyone will honor them by reading them, he remarks in curiously modern phrase, he will see, William thinks, the fine skill of an excellent versifier. For the most part, the verses scarcely deserve that praise, though they are better than many of Aldhelm's own composition. But in one place where Peter breaks out into dactylic rhyming lines, there is a striking ring about the verse. This Ferretius, because he had been a monk at Malmesbury, wrote a life of Aldhelm. William, as it has been said, is critical about this life. Ferretius, he remarks, was a forerunner, and therefore at a disadvantage for such a work. He relied on himself for his facts, an awkward characteristic in a writer of history. He advanced no evidences for his statements. William determined to take a very different course in writing his own life of Aldhelm. He would give us his evidence for each statement. But curiously enough, he does not carry out his resolve by descending to particulars and his suggestion that Ferretius wrote on insufficient evidence. Indeed, his only correction of Faridius is in connection with the derivation of Aldhelm's name, which Faridius took to mean Almus, kindly old man, whereas Aldhelm in himself, the letter to a pupil, said that it was Aldhelm, the old helmet. And after all, that does not come to much, and there was something to be said for it. The life by Faridius covers 33 octavo pages, that by William 110. A short life published by Capgrave is a mere summary of the more interesting events of the life, compressed into 4 octavo pages. The author in this short space contrives to contradict the theory of mine with regard to the white marble altar, which, as we shall see, Aldhelm brought from Italy by inserting a statement that he brought it from Rome, as I believe he brought it from Lombardy. Faridius, on his part, was not conscious of any want of proper equipment for his task. And here we will have to call it. Verse 3 of hymn 107. Good Christians, rejoice with heart and soul and voice. Now ye need not fear the grave. Jesus Christ was born to save. Calls you one, calls you all to gain his everlasting hall. Christ was born to save. Christ was born to save. Let us pray. Blessing and honor, glory and power be unto him that sitteth upon the throne, and unto the Lamb forever and ever. Amen. Godspeed.